Israel has killed the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar. He was accused of planning the October the 7th attacks. But what does Sinwar's death mean for the Palestinian resistance, and will it end the war on Gaza? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. Yahya Sinwar was the face of the Palestinian armed struggle against Israel's decades-long occupation. He became the leader of Hamas after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in July. The Israeli military says Sinwar was killed during a firefight with Israeli forces in southern Gaza on Wednesday. Israel's Prime Minister praised his killing and called it the beginning of the end of the war on Gaza. But how will this affect the ceasefire efforts and the fate of the Israeli captives? And what's it mean for the Palestinian resistance? We'll put that to our guests in a moment. But first, this report from Alex Baird.
This is what the Israeli army says was Yahya Sinwar's final moments. The leader of Hamas in a bombed-out building in Rafah throwing a stick at a surveillance drone. Moments later, Israel says he was killed by Israeli troops. It was a death the leader had expected years earlier.
The greatest gift the enemy and the occupation could give me is to assassinate me and allow me to die a hero at their hands.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced the killing as a milestone, but promised to continue the war on Gaza.
I would like to say again, in the clearest way, Hamas will no longer rule Gaza. This is the beginning of the day after Hamas, and this is an opportunity for you, the residents of Gaza, to finally break free from this tyranny. To the Hamas terrorists I say, your leaders are fleeing and they will be eliminated. I call on everyone who holds our hostages, whoever lays down his weapons and returns our hostages, we will allow him to go on living.
For many in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar died a hero.
The killing of the leader Yahya Sinwar is a heavy blow for the Palestinian people. Netanyahu won't stop. We know that. All the Palestinian people are targeted, not only Sinwar, because every day there are massacres.
But his death does little to change the reality for millions of Palestinians in Gaza who face starvation, relentless Israeli bombing, and repeated forced displacement.
To those who are crying for the Israeli captives, to them we say, those captives cannot return to you until and unless the war on Gaza comes to a halt and our Palestinian detainees released.
And while many Israelis celebrated the death of Sinwar, protesters in Tel Aviv didn't let the news derail their near-daily rallies demanding their government do more to agree to a ceasefire deal that will release the captives still held in Gaza.
A lot of chances that were missed, and we cannot miss this opportunity. We must bring them now, immediate, because we are saying it again and again, but I think this is the very last chance to bring them back.
Many international leaders say they hope Sinwar's death will lead to the end of Israel's war on Gaza and ease the suffering of Palestinians. But Israel has been clear, this is not the end. Alex Baird, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our panel of guests to discuss all of this. In London, we have Azam Tamimi, political activist and author of the book Hamas, Unwritten Chapters. Here in Doha, Tamar Kahout, Associate Professor of Public Policy at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. He specialises in conflict resolution and international aid. And also in London, Gilbert Ashkar, Professor of Development Studies and International Relations at the University of London's School of Oriental and African Studies, known to most of us as SOAS. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us here on Inside Story today. Azam, you've written books on Hamas. Tell me, how big a blow is Sinwar's death to the Hamas movement?
Well, it's a blow, but it's not the first of its kind. Over the past 30 or so years, Hamas lost many of its top leaders. Its founder, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, his successor, Abdulaziz al-Rantisi, But the removal of the top leader or any leader in whatever capacity does not really weaken the movement or force it to change its strategy. We haven't ever seen a sign of this. I think to the contrary, especially the way in which Sinwar left this world is going to turn him into probably a much bigger icon than every other leader that was eliminated before him.
Azam, though, you say, I mean, you know, there was that double blow in 2004 for Hamas when the founder, Sheikh Yassin, was killed, and then just days later, the following leader, Rantisi, was killed, and they managed to rebuild themselves despite that double blow. But surely it's much more difficult now. They have had a year of devastating bombardment of the Gaza Strip.
Well, that is true. It's not more difficult because Sinwar has been killed, but because of the devastation Israel has caused throughout Gaza. That is true, of course. But see, Hamas is based on an idea, and it is this idea that keeps alive. And it will attract more and more Palestinians, Arabs and Muslims, and supporters of Palestine around the world, because it seems to them at the moment that it is the only man left standing in defense of that idea.
Tamer, let me ask you about the manner of his death that Azam just talked about. I mean, there are two possible narratives, aren't there, here? One, he was not a coward. He was there in his military fatigues, bravely fighting on the front line with a weapon himself. And then there's the other narrative. He had no bodyguards around him. He was almost alone and isolated, showing an organisation that may be running out of manpower and supplies with no centralised command system. Which one is it?
It's both, I think, James. I mean, Sinwar's personality has been studied over a long period of time since he assumed his leadership position in Hamas. He has left his stamp everywhere on the movement's hierarchy, structure, operations. He's a fighter. Of course, he's a fighter. I'm sure the Israelis did not anticipate the way he died. I mean, this outcome or this scenario, it did not serve Israel's propaganda, which has been so far trying to damage his reputation, to claim or to say that he's a coward hiding in tunnels. I mean, of course, I mean, if it was, I think, I mean, following from many reports like that if it was not for the leaks that immediately, I mean, the leaks of his death, Israel otherwise could have more or less tried to control this narrative on his death and try to damage it. But the reality, no. I mean, he died fighting for a cause he believed in. And of course, he leaves a legacy for thousands of and millions of Palestinians and supporters who will follow the same cause and the same tactics, because let's remind your viewers that Hamas came to be as a political and military movement because of the Israeli occupation. So as long as Israel continues its occupation and there is no final solution, Hamas will keep regenerating itself, repositioning itself, rebranding itself to keep the fight.
Gilbert, I mean, some may compare, because Israel are claiming a great success here, this with the death of Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon. But I think in many ways it was different, wasn't it? Because this was not some great intelligence success by the Israelis, and the Israeli intelligence, backed by the whole of the US intelligence apparatus, have been looking for Sinwar, but they don't seem to have had any of the information that Israel seems to have got with regard to penetration of Hezbollah.
Yes, indeed. It was much less spectacular than the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, which, as you know, was done with very heavy, intensive use of air bombing and a lot of intelligence. Here, in this case, it was almost fortuitous. However, I would say that, if we had to compare this assassination with the previous assassination of Hamas leaders. This one is definitely the most important, the most significant, not in terms of what Yahya Sinwar himself represented. Some of the previous leaders of Hamas may be regarded as even more important or for the movement, but for the circumstances under which it came, which is that this is now seen as a war trophy for the Israeli state, for Benjamin Netanyahu in particular. I mean, this is a great victory for him, and that's how he is exploiting it. And I mean, you can say a lot about the narrative that was more or less contradicted by the way Sinwar died. But there is another narrative that is vindicated in the eyes of Netanyahu, which is to say, to the Americans, to all states that exerted pressure on him not to invade Rafah. Well, he can say, look, had we not invaded Rafah, we would not have been able to kill Yahya Sinwar. And that's the key message that is going through. And Netanyahu is very much triumphalist now. He has, he has scored a number of victories over the last few weeks. And of course, this has boosted enormously his popularity among the Israeli public. And of course, this is just encouraging him to carry on with his aggressive policy.
Azam, how long do you think we'll have to wait until there is a new leader? And do you think we will see one leader? I mean, before August, before Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran, there was a leader outside and a leader inside. Do you see that model again potentially? And do you think on the ground in Gaza we'll have a new generation leader?
No. Hamas doesn't have a leader on the inside and the leader on the outside. Hamas has 3 constituencies. Gaza has a leader, the West Bank had a leader, the diaspora has a leader, and there is an overarching leader who was Haniyeh. Sinwar at the time was the leader of the local organization inside Gaza. So when Haniyeh was assassinated, the Shura Council met to deliberate about who should succeed him. And many people thought probably Khalid Mish'al would succeed him because convention had it that the leader should be in the diaspora to have free movement, etc. However, Khalid Mish'al insisted that because Gaza is at the forefront, someone from Gaza should replace Haniyeh, and he was in favor of Sinwar like everybody else. It will be a matter of a few days. I think they will have to meet again and decide who is likely to be the leader now.
Tamer, I mean, it will be a difficult job for the new leader, will it not? Because Sinwar had been in control for some time, and he certainly had authority in the movement. And he also had previously spent 2 decades in an Israeli prison. He spoke Hebrew, and he understood how the Israelis worked. You're not going to find another figure like that, are you?
James, I'm not sure. So I mean, yes, Sinwar has his own legacy. He was a charismatic leader, but I think, there's so many in the movement who have the same set or similar set of skills and knowledge and representation to take over and to lead. But I think that's not the issue. The issue is, for me, is that I think the movement at this critical point or juncture has to go through some soul-searching mission to reposition itself. Because, let me put it this way, October 7th was a very decisive event and dividing at the same time. It came in a context of a very brutal occupation. At the same time, it came in a context of lack of Palestinian unity. And I think that's the elephant in the room, where also there is a need for some urgency on focusing on this issue. Hamas has been diminished in terms of its capabilities inside the Gaza Strip. As a resistance and governance movement at the same time, it realizes for sure that it cannot stay in governance the same way it was before the war, because it cannot alone take care of the future needs of governance in Gaza or the reconstruction. it also realizes that it is isolated regionally and internationally at the same time. So when I say soul-searching mission, I think the leadership of Hamas, the future leadership of Hamas, need to set a new strategy or a new mission for the movement to tackle these big and huge obstacles. And I think at the top of these priorities should be figuring out how to reconcile the Palestinian house and how to reach to an agreement with Fatah and other Palestinian factions to form a unity government. So it could be in control and also more or less try to navigate through the complexity that Israel will also create for any future government structures in Gaza. So this is I think where Hamas is now, and it's not going to be an easy mission.
Gilbert, how do you think this will be viewed from Tehran? Because in terms of Iran's regional strategy, the two main arms were Hezbollah and Hamas. Both have been seriously degraded, and their regional strategy is somewhat in disarray, would you not say? And of course, we still have not had the Israeli response to Iran's last attack, and they continue to say that they are going to respond.
Yes, I mean, of course, Hezbollah is far more important for Iran than Hamas ever was. The deterrent capacity of Hamas was very limited. The armament, the firepower of Hamas was very limited compared to that of Hezbollah. And the links between Hamas and Iran are not comparable to the kind of links which are much narrower that you have between Hezbollah and Iran. So the big deal for Tehran is what is happening today to Hezbollah is the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, who was much more important for Iran than any of Yahya Sinwar or Ismail Haniyeh, for obvious, I would say, reasons of the kind of connection that you have between Hezbollah as an organization and the Iranian regime. So that is their main problem today, is what is going on in Lebanon and the threat that is pending now of the Israeli retaliation to their attack on the 1st of October. That's the big question mark. What kind of retaliation you will have? Will it target the nuclear installation? Will it target military installations? Will it target anything else? That's the big question. For the Iranian leadership today, that's their main concern.
Azam, let me tell you what Prime Minister Netanyahu said. This is what he said in his televised address. "The war, my dear ones, is not yet over. We have before us a great opportunity to stop the axis of evil and create a different future." And those words have been backed by actions. Of course, we had that strike on an UNRWA school on Thursday, killed 28 people. But since then, Israel's bombardment has continued completely unabated. This is not a moment, is it, Azam, where Israel are going to say, mission accomplished?
No, it's highly unlikely, of course. Netanyahu is jubilant at the moment. He feels he has triumphed, and probably he thinks he can achieve more. But that's the nature of tyranny. I mean, tyrants always think along these lines. And I think what will probably happen is that the fight will continue either until Israel manages to achieve its objectives, which it hasn't been able to achieve until now, or they will the so-called international community will do something in order to force some sort of a ceasefire and stop the war. But Hamas is still adamant that it would not settle for anything less than the terms it had already agreed on.
Well, Azam, it's interesting that Netanyahu is saying that because, of course, we've heard from the only main country that backs Israel in its bombardment, which, of course, is the US. We heard from President Biden. He put out a statement. And moments after his statement was released, the US Vice President, of course, presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, she had this to say.
This moment gives us an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza. And it must end such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. And it is time for the day after to begin, without Hamas in power. We will not give up on these goals, and I will always work to create a future of peace, dignity, and security for all.
Well, let's look at the prospects of an end, or at least a ceasefire, and the prisoner exchange and release of the Israeli captives. Tamer, let me first start with the Hamas side of the equation. We don't know whether a new leader, because we don't know who a new leader or leaders will be, whether they're prepared to enter new negotiations after Sinwar's death, do we? And we don't know clearly who the other side, who the Israelis and the Americans are going to negotiate with.
James, correct. I mean, it's too early because, again, Hamas is still. I mean, we don't know who's the new leader of Hamas. However, we can sense some signs that, like Khalil al-Hayya, the Hamas leader in Gaza, he just came out recently today, and he was very adamant that there will be no release of Israeli captives. I mean, the way Israel demands. So I think we're very far away from achieving any of this. The framework Kamala Harris has put together. We're talking about 1 month away from the American elections. I think Kamala Harris or the Biden administration now, they're starting to talk the right things, more or less. But realistically speaking, I mean, I'm examining the U.S. behavior in this conflict from the onset of October 7th, I think it will be hard to achieve any of the objectives Kamala Harris has laid down. And realistically speaking, I don't see it happening. But this speech serves serves the elections purposes inside the U.S. So I would be careful. I mean, personally, I don't think anything can happen within a month's time before the American elections.
Gilbert, let me look at the Israeli side of this. There has been a framework for a deal for months and months and months. It was even endorsed in a UN Security Council resolution. So the question is, perhaps, whether the real obstacle is Prime Minister Netanyahu. The State Department spokesman Matthew Miller at the Daily Briefing says the chief obstacle to reaching that ceasefire has been Sinwar. That obstacle has obviously been removed. Well, that's been the US position for some time. That's going to be seriously tested now, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a blatant lie. You know, when anyone from the State Department, or including Blinken himself or anyone else, claim that the obstacle to that ceasefire agreement was Hamas or Sinwar, they know perfectly well that it is untrue. That the truth is, as Joe Biden himself recently recognized, even if indirectly, the truth is that Netanyahu has no intention of handing that kind of present, that kind of gift to the Democrats, to the Biden administration, that includes Kamala Harris today as a candidate, giving them the gift of an agreement with a return, with a liberation of captives, including American citizens who would be, received at the White House in great pomp. So that would be a strong argument for the Harris campaign, and Netanyahu is not going to do that. He is betting on Donald Trump. That's very clear, and that's why he won't. There's no kind of ceasefire agreement that could be reached before the 5th of November in any event. Now, depending on the result on the 5th of November, that will change things. That is, if Trump wins, Netanyahu would consider himself, emboldened in his extreme positions. If Harris wins, then he might seek some kind of compromise. But anyway, I mean, you put the right question before. I mean, is there anyone to talk to about the fate of the captives today in Gaza? We don't know, and ultimately, in order for Netanyahu to say mission accomplished, he would need to have a clear perspective on what to do after that. And for now, there is absolutely no clear perspective, and Netanyahu is just hesitating among different pressures on what to do once the fighting stops.
Azam, we hear from the President Biden that he's sending his Secretary of State back to Israel. I'm not sure we should get optimistic about that. I've lost count of the number of times that he's made visits. But he is also, that was the letter a few days ago, with a 30-day deadline to put pressure on Israel to let aid in, to let aid in or else. That takes us past US election day on the 5th of November. Do you believe if there is a Harris victory, as Gilbert said, there is potentially the chance of some optimism, of some sort of ceasefire, some end to the war, that perhaps Biden might finally use the leverage he clearly has?
Well, I wouldn't speculate on this. And I think the Americans have been party to the massacres that have been committed in Gaza. They've been party to the genocide. This silly talk about 30 days notice, it is as if they're saying to Netanyahu, okay, you have 30 days to finish the job or else. So he's going to continue killing and starving people until the Americans see what they can do after 30 days, and they will do nothing because all the weapons with which the Palestinians are butchered come from Washington, mostly. And therefore, I think the U.S. administration is fighting its own war in Israel via the Netanyahu administration.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to all three of you, our guests today, Azam Tamimi, Tamer Kamut and Gilbert Ashkar. In-depth coverage of events in Gaza, Lebanon and Israel continues on Al Jazeera 24 hours a day, and you can get more analysis and context on our app or at aljazeera.com. Please let us know what you think of the programme and what topics we should focus on in the future by going to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or contact us using X at AJ Inside Story. I'll be back here very soon. Until then, from me, James Bays, and the team here, stay safe. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.